Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ModGear. This week, I'm driving the Subaru WRX, a rally legend and a great tuner-friendly car for all car enthusiasts alike. So, let's just get right into it, shall we? But, before we begin this week's episode, let's take a step back in the rallying past, for a brief history lesson. Our story on the WRX begins in the early 1990s. Subaru, for some mysterious reason, no one knows why, needed to find a replacement for the current Subaru Leone, or Leone, whatever you want to call it. I don't really know how to pronounce it. I'm assuming it's Leone, though. Which the Leone had been around since basically the early 70s, so it was definitely due for a replacement. And what replaced it was the Impreza. And the Impreza first went on sale in 1992, and its first generation was actually pretty solid. The car had a large selection of possible engines that you could choose from, ranging from a small 1.5-liter 4-cylinder all the way up to a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder, so definitely some very interesting engine options, let's be honest here. Many of the engines pumped out solid power, either from around as low as 100 up upwards to 200 horsepower, so for a 4-cylinder it's actually pretty impressive. The name WRX, however, because again, this is a WRX, this isn't just some ordinary Subaru, this isn't the Crosstrek, whatever it's called, this is a WRX, people. But the name WRX first came around basically in the launch year of the Impreza, in November of 1992. The term actually standing for World Rally Experimental, and yes, the X is capitalized specifically because, Subaru and their naming. It was put on pretty much with, well, a bunch of rally techs, so, everything rally you can think of. Some of these things included things like all-wheel drive, stiffened up suspension, and of course, turbocharged engines. Yes, we needed turbocharged engines in our street-legal cars. Yeah, we needed that. The WRX and STi models were also looking pretty sporty too. Because again, well, we gotta maintain the sporty value to impress your friends down the streets, am I right? Many of these cars had very nice looking wheels, bronze wheels, maybe. They had hood scoops, and they also had very subtle rear spoilers. But trust me, the spoilers looked pretty nice too. The second generation Impreza brought basically a wider body as well as length, and a pretty nice and solid facelift. Many remembering, well, the bug-eye design from the 2000s. Let's be honest, who's not going to remember that bug-eye design? Let's be honest here, because again, it's too iconic. In 2004, the WRX STi was brought back, because again, well, we needed that. The car was pumping well over 200 horsepower, actually it was like 300 horsepower, so scratch that, it was pumping 300. The car also had all-wheel drive, and, well, much more. Let's put it that way, there's a lot I could explain about it. The WRX, as well as many other Subaru models since then, have quickly become a big deal in the automotive community. And, well, it's definitely a very tuner-friendly car. Over the next few generations of the WRX and the Subaru's life, the Impreza would definitely change quite a lot, and its styling also definitely changed as well. The fourth generation, well, is not necessarily less loved by fans, but it was still a great car and an awesome successor to the 2004 WRX that we all come to know and love. And the fifth generation WRX isn't actually on the market quite yet, but it is expected to drop sometime in the 2020 model year, and it does look pretty good. Altogether, the WRX is a great car, both in the rally world, again, because rallycross with its off-road suspension, it's, all-wheel drive, because again, let's face it, all-wheel drive, and both daily use and just car enthusiasts alike. It's a car that's very easy to get your hands on because, again, they're quite cheap, and they're very easy to modify and just have fun around, hooting it around the back streets of their, local neighborhoods or, doing stuff like that. But anyway, with that pretty solid history lesson out of the way, we can get to this week's episode. Take it away, Panda! Thank you, Mr. History Panda, and with that, we can begin today's tests, starting with the top speed test. Welcome to the Genesis 1 Mile Dragway. It's a place where many cars come to push their engines, and well, a surprisingly large amount of their speed, to their limit, simply to put their speed onto the boards. So let's see how the Subaru WRX can do in this test. The Subie WRX STi, whichever you want to call it, topped out at a surprisingly low 88.1 miles per hour. It's definitely a bit slow for a car like this, but maybe it's just waiting for one of those rally courses or something like that to really shine. It's an okay run from the WRX, but I just hope the speed would be a bit better. Next up is the lateral braking of the brake test. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to make sure that all 4 of the car's brakes stop once it passes this white line. The goal of the test is to not hit the parked Nissan Leaf, and if you do, you want to measure your distance based on how far the Nissan Leaf moves from its parking spot. So let's see how well the Subaru can do in this test. The WRX doesn't really have the brakes that I expected it to have, but it could have gotten a lot worse considering its condition. So it's an okay run from the Subie. Next up is the cornering test, and to do that, I've come here. This is the Forksville Test Circuit. Developed by the ModGear development team, it's used to help judge a car's endurance on tight corners, tight bends, and jumps, to further prove how a car can handle on a track-focused setting. So let's see how well the WRX can do on the Forksville Test Circuit. The WRX performs okay in this test. Under heavy cornering as well as braking, the car does have a tendency to spin out. And the brakes, well, are doing horrible. They're basically just giant bags of potatoes. So stopping way before a corner is basically a must if you're actually going to get into the corner. It's an okay run from the WRX, but I just hope that maybe, just maybe, it can improve on some of these things. Next up is the backup camera view of the parallel park test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to make sure that we can park the Subaru between these 2 parked Renault Meganes. And when we do, we want to make sure that there's enough space both in the front and the back of the car for someone to walk through. So let's see how well the Subaru can do in the parallel park test. And with ease, the WRX passes this test. Next up is the rallycross roads of the gravel road segment. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to see how well cars can perform on day-to-day driving conditions, whether this be, cracks on a road, just bumps, potholes, whichever you want to do it. We're going to see how well cars perform on these conditions and how their suspension reacts. So let's see how well the Subaru WRX can do in the gravel road segment. The WRX does pretty well here. The suspension in the car is, well, it's basically built for this kind of terrain, so it's sort of expected. But my one big surprise was a body roll and just overall shaking of the car, which definitely shocked me by how much it was shaking and wobbling around, basically feeling a lot like jelly in a sense. It's a pretty good run either way, aside from this, from the WRX. Next up is the bump in your stump of the bump test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to see how well cars can tackle small and large bumps, seeing how well their front end and back end and undercarriage of the car will be affected, if they're going to be destroyed or not. So let's see how the WRX can do in the bump test. The WRX does okay in the bump test. There were some times when the front end was hitting the front of the bumps, but for most of the time, the car performed pretty solid, with the undercarriage not experiencing hardly any damage, as well as the back end. But the front end definitely was experiencing damage from time to time, therefore it makes it an okay run from the Subie. Next up is the nauseousness of the slalom test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to see how body roll and a loss of speed while cornering can affect a car on a track focus setting. We already know a little bit as to how the Subaru can perform on a track focus setting, but we're going to go ahead and test this anyway just to get a better idea. So let's see how the WRX can do. WRX does pretty well here. My only major complaints being that, once again, the brakes are basically just a bag of potatoes, and the steering does feel a little bit vague, and body roll is definitely present, but there really isn't that much of it, so it's not going to affect the loss of speed. Overall, I feel like that the WRX did pretty well here, but with the steering feeling vague, it's definitely going to vary from different experiences. The MPG figures the Subaru has are relatively okay, with an average of 18 miles per gallon in the city and 24 miles per gallon in the highway. Considering that the engine is making around 200 horsepower though, it's a 4-cylinder, it's pretty high liters though, it actually isn't really that bad for the kind of engine and for the kind of car it is. But aside from this, how do these figures apply on the track? And now, let's give the Subaru WRX STi an official lap around the Futaro circuit. The official standard time is 2:03:14. With added up accidents and collisions, the final adjusted time is 2:03:14.
Let's do this! The fuck?
Now you're gonna get it, motherfucker!
Oh no! Stop right there, criminal scum! Stop breaking the law, asshole!
Holy fuck.
It's time to stop! Oh, what the fuck? Oh shit, 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 oh shit! Stop right there, criminal scum!
Hi, how are you?
Oh shit! Oh shit!
Psych!
Bring me that bass!
Holy fuck.
what the fuck? Let's do this.
Oh no.
God fucking damn it!
Stop breaking the law, asshole! Stop right there, criminal scum!
So, what are my final thoughts on the Subaru WRX STi? Well, this car mainly performed on an average level during most of the tests that we threw at it. The steering does feel a bit loose and a bit vague, but it's not super crazy. The brakes are basically just literal bags of potatoes and they suck, and its top speed as well, it's pretty slow. 88 miles an hour is definitely not going to do a lot. But if you're looking at this car from a tuner perspective, it's very easy to get your hands on because again, they're very cheap and is a very great first choice car for a lot of tuners. Whether it's rallycross, daily use, or just a tuning project, the WRX is basically still a must-drive car, and well, it's a pretty good car all around for many enthusiasts around the world, so I'd highly recommend you at least drive this car once, or, just at least work on one, because they're really simple to work on, and they're just very easy to get used to. Why'd I just butcher that sentence? But anyway, on that bug-eye-like note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching, we'll see you next week. Good night.